Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into some pretty deep waters today.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be exploring Viktor Petrenko,
Okay.
a Russian psychologist who focuses on something called psychosemantics.
Interesting.
And we've got this awesome 2007 article by Alexei Ulanovsky that really breaks it down for us.
Oh, cool.
This is going to be pretty meta, I think.
Meta how?
Well, because we're basically going to be talking about how we create our understanding of reality.
That is meta.
Yeah. So this is going to be interesting. So one of the things that is really interesting about Petrenko's work
Yeah.
is that he challenges this assumption
Mm-hmm.
that we're all just passive observers of the world.
Right. Yeah. That's a pretty common assumption, I think.
Yeah.
So what does he say instead?
Well, he argues that we actually actively construct our own reality through these different systems of meaning.
Okay, so like what? What systems?
Well, he thinks that language has a really big role to play.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Language is a constructor of reality.
Yeah. Does that mean that everyone has their own version of the truth? I mean, is reality completely subjective then?
Well, not quite. Petrenko actually builds on the work of Lev Vygotsky.
Right.
And Vygotsky was all about the social origins of our mental functions.
Okay, so how does that tie in here?
So basically, he's saying that our interactions with others, particularly through language, actually shape how we think and how we perceive.
So you're saying that it's not just language that helps us to express our thoughts, but language that actually helps form those thoughts in the first place.
Exactly. Think about a child
Okay.
learning colors for the first time. They learn blue, green, red. They're not just putting labels on categories they already had in their minds.
Right.
They're actually developing those categories as they're learning the language.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
So for Petrenko, language isn't just about like describing the world. It's
Yeah.
like this tool for shaping it.
Exactly. And he takes this idea even further with the concept of semantic spaces.
Semantic spaces.
Yeah.
So what are those?
Basically, imagine mental maps that are unique to both individuals and groups.
Okay.
And these maps reveal how we organize concepts and give meaning to the world.
Okay, can you give me like a visual?
Sure. Imagine a 3D map where words and concepts are clustered together based on their perceived similarity.
Okay.
So, for example, for one group, justice and fairness might be right next to each other, but for a different group, justice might be closer to law and order.
Okay.
So these are semantic spaces, and they can look vastly different from person to person.
Okay, that makes more sense. So it's like we're all walking around with these invisible maps in our heads that are kind of guiding how we interpret everything.
Yes, exactly.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating is that Petrenko didn't just talk about these spaces.
Yeah.
He developed methods to actually map them out.
Whoa.
Yeah, so he could show the hidden structure of how different groups understand the world.
Okay, so we've got Vygotsky, we've got semantic spaces,
Yeah.
but there's another name that we need to bring in here, and that's George Kelly.
Oh, yeah.
He had this theory called personal construct theory,
Right.
and it seems to really tie in with Petrenko's ideas.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So can you give us a quick breakdown?
Yeah, so Kelly argued that we build our understanding of the world through these things called personal constructs.
Okay.
And they're basically mental templates that we use to categorize and interpret our experiences.
Okay.
Kind of like being a scientist testing hypotheses and revising theories based on new information.
So we're all just little scientists running around.
Exactly.
So then for both Kelly and for Petrenko, reality isn't something that we just receive passively.
Yeah.
It's something we actively construct.
Yes. And this really challenges that traditional reflection theory.
Okay.
Remember that was big in Russian psychology for a while.
Yeah.
It saw the mind as just a mirror passively reflecting the external world.
Okay. That seems like the total opposite of what Petrenko and Kelly are saying.
Yeah, it really is. But even within the reflection theory, there were hints of this constructivist thinking.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like Vygotsky's concept of internalization.
Okay.
He argued that our higher mental functions, things like logical reasoning and planning, they actually begin in social interactions.
Okay.
And then we kind of absorb them into our individual mental frameworks.
So our social world shapes our inner world.
Exactly.
Okay, this is starting to sound like that saying, doing change is seeing.
Yes.
And we have another psychologist here in our notes, A.N. Leontiev,
Right.
and his activity theory. How does he fit into this?
Well, Leontiev, he took this whole active engagement idea even further.
Okay.
And he said that the things we do in the world actually shape how we understand the world.
Oh, I see.
So give me an example.
Okay, so think of a chef.
Okay.
Their knowledge of ingredients and how to use them actually changes how they see a tomato.
Okay.
They're going to see potential and possibilities where other people might just see a salad ingredient.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so our interactions with the world actually change how we see it. Exactly. And for Petrenko, language is like the prime example of this.
Okay.
Because language is not just this neutral tool. It actually shapes reality. He takes a lot of inspiration from the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis.
Right. The idea that language might actually influence how we see the world.
Yes.
That's a wild idea. So if a language doesn't have a word for a certain concept, can the speakers of that language even perceive that concept?
Well, the strong version of that idea, that language totally determines thought, that has been pretty much debunked.
Okay.
But the idea that language can influence our perceptions and our categories is still around.
So it's not that language dictates what we can and can't see.
Right.
It's more like it provides us with a framework,
Yeah.
a set of lenses
Right.
to see the world.
Exactly. Think about how metaphors shape political discourse.
Okay.
Like one side will talk about tax burdens, right?
Right.
And the other talks about investing in our future.
Yeah.
Those choices totally frame the issue in very different ways.
Right.
Right. And then that influences how people see the problem and the solutions.
Yeah, I could see how powerful that could be. Okay, so we've got these cultural lenses shaped by language
Yeah.
and shared meanings,
Yeah.
and that is affecting how we all see reality.
Yeah.
But do we all just inherit these passively, or is there something more to it?
Well, that's where Petrenko brings in psychological relativity.
Okay.
And he's suggesting that just like cultures have their own lenses, individuals also develop unique ways of categorizing and perceiving the world.
Oh, so it's like we all have these cultural lenses,
Right.
but then we also have our own personal lenses that shape things further.
Exactly. And this leads to one of Petrenko's most provocative claims,
Yeah.
that there are no pure facts,
Okay.
only interpretations filtered through those personal and cultural lenses.
Wait, hold on. That's a
Yes.
big statement.
It is.
So you're saying there's no such thing as objective truth. Everything is relative.
Well, not necessarily. What we're saying is that even scientific facts, they're shaped by the theories and methods used to study them,
Right.
and even the language we use. I mean, think about how our understanding of the universe has changed.
Right.
Like what we once thought were facts about, I don't know, the Earth's position or the nature of light,
Yeah.
those have all been revised
Right.
as our tools and methods have evolved.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so this is really making me rethink a lot of things.
It is a lot to think about.
If even facts can be interpreted differently, how can we be sure of anything?
That's where Petrenko's research on those semantic spaces becomes really helpful.
Okay.
He developed methods to map them out, not just theoretically, but like actually showing the structures of how different groups make meaning of the world.
Okay, so we've laid the foundation here.
Yeah.
We've looked at how these individual and cultural factors, especially language, shape our reality.
Right.
But how did Petrenko actually go about studying this?
Well, that's where this groundbreaking research on those semantic spaces comes in.
All right, tell me more.
We'll get into that.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so these semantic spaces, these mental maps showing us how people understand the world,
Right.
but how do we actually see them? I mean, they're not like physical maps that we can unfold, are they?
Well, that's where Petrenko got really creative. He used all sorts of methods to try to visualize these spaces.
Okay.
One way he did it was he asked people to rate the similarity between different concepts.
Oh.
Like, say he was studying how different political parties view the world.
Mm-hmm.
He might ask people how similar or different they see concepts like freedom or equality or justice.
So he's asking them to map out their internal landscape using
Yeah.
these concepts as landmarks.
Exactly. And then by looking at the patterns in these ratings,
Yeah.
he could create a visual representation of that semantic space for each group.
I bet those maps would look pretty different depending on the group's political leanings.
Oh, absolutely. The way concepts are clustered together, the distances between them. All of that tells us a lot about how each group is constructing their political reality.
So, for example,
Yeah.
a group that really values individual liberty might put freedom right next to economic opportunity.
Right, exactly.
But a group that's more focused on social justice,
Yeah.
they might cluster equality and fairness
Yeah.
closer together.
Exactly. It's fascinating stuff.
It is. It's like we have X-ray vision into people's minds. But, okay, so if everyone is walking around with these different semantic maps,
Yeah.
how can we even communicate? It seems like we're all speaking different languages, even when we're using the same words.
That's a great point, and it brings up something really important.
What's that?
Understanding these semantic spaces isn't about saying that one is right and the other is wrong.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that people can have genuinely different understandings of the same concepts.
So it's not that one group is delusional or misinformed.
Right.
It's just that they're operating with a different framework.
Precisely. And that has huge implications for how we approach disagreements.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, if we just assume everyone sees the world the same way we do,
Mm-hmm.
then communication breakdowns are inevitable, right?
Yeah.
But if we acknowledge that these different semantic spaces exist,
Yeah.
then we can at least try to bridge those gaps by understanding where those differences are coming from.
So instead of just talking past each other,
Right.
we can actually listen and try to see the other person's perspective.
Exactly. And Petrenko thought this was where psychology could be so valuable by helping us understand these different ways of meaning making. Psychology could help us communicate more effectively and empathize across cultural and ideological divides.
That sounds really hopeful,
It does.
but also kind of daunting.
Yeah.
How do we even begin to bridge these gaps when our maps of reality are so different?
It's a challenge for sure.
It is.
But Petrenko's work gives us a few starting points.
Okay, like what?
Well, firstly, we need to be aware of our own biases
Right.
and assumptions, recognizing that our way of seeing things isn't the only way.
So being open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
Exactly. Or at least that our perspective is incomplete.
That can be hard to do, especially when you're in the middle of an argument with someone.
It's definitely a challenge,
Yeah.
but that's where the second point comes in. Being curious about other people's perspectives.
Yeah.
Instead of assuming we know what they think, we need to ask questions, listen actively, and really try to understand the logic behind their viewpoints.
That makes sense. But what if we encounter viewpoints that just seem totally incompatible with our values?
That's where it gets tricky, and Petrenko acknowledged that sometimes those differences just can't be reconciled.
Yeah.
But even then,
Yeah.
understanding those underlying semantic spaces can at least help us understand why we disagree,
Okay.
which is a lot more productive than just dismissing each other.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
I'm seeing the practical side of this now.
Yeah.
It's not about pretending everyone thinks alike.
Right.
It's about getting a deeper understanding of those differences.
Yes.
So we can communicate better, empathize more,
Exactly.
and maybe even find common ground.
You got it. And while all this might seem theoretical,
Yeah.
Petrenko didn't just leave it there.
Oh, really?
He actually put these ideas into practice, doing all these fascinating studies to explore these semantic spaces in different situations.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, one of the most interesting ones is his research on political groups.
Okay.
He wanted to see if he could map out the worldviews of different political parties using their understanding of key concepts.
Okay, so how did he actually do that? So how did he map out the worldviews of different political parties? Did he have them fill out a survey or something?
Well, he used this method called the semantic differential.
Okay.
It involved giving people pairs of opposite adjectives,
Huh.
like strong, weak, or good, bad, or active, passive.
Okay.
And then he'd ask them to rate how well each adjective described a specific concept.
So instead of asking them to define these big abstract ideas like justice or freedom, he's trying to get at their understanding through these simpler descriptions.
Exactly. It's a bit like trying to understand someone's personality
Okay.
by watching how they behave, rather than just asking them to describe themselves.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So what did he find? Did the different parties actually have different semantic spaces?
The results were pretty amazing.
Really?
Yeah. The maps showed clear differences in how they understood these key political concepts.
Like what?
Well, for example, one party might strongly associate freedom with individualism and economic opportunity,
Okay.
while another party might link freedom more to social responsibility and equality.
So they're using the same word,
Yeah,
but it has totally different meanings for them.
exactly. It just goes to show how important it is to look beyond the surface level of language and really dig into those underlying semantic spaces.
If we only focus on the words themselves,
Right.
we might miss those deeper layers of meaning that are actually shaping people's perceptions and their beliefs.
You got it. This has given me a whole new perspective on political debates.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's not just about the facts and figures.
Yeah.
It's about these hidden frameworks of meaning that we don't always talk about, but that are so powerful.
Exactly. This has big implications for how we approach political discourse.
So how do we even start to have productive conversations across those divides?
Well, first we need to be aware of these semantic differences
Okay.
and be willing to engage with them in a respectful way.
This is all really insightful.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, it's also a bit unsettling. I mean, if our understanding of even basic concepts like freedom can be so different,
Yeah.
does that mean we're just stuck in our own separate realities? Is there any hope for finding common ground?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And Petrenko knew how challenging it was to bridge these semantic gaps.
Yeah.
But he believed that recognizing these differences was the first step.
Yep.
It's like those optical illusions where you see one thing and then suddenly you shift your perspective.
Right.
And you see something completely different.
Oh, I see what you mean. It's not about erasing the differences.
Right.
It's about becoming aware of them and then maybe finding a way to integrate them into a bigger picture.
Exactly. And that's where the power of dialogue comes in. If we can really listen to each other and try to understand the reasoning behind those different viewpoints, we can start to build bridges across those divides.
So it's not about trying to convince everyone to see things our way.
Yeah.
It's more about expanding our own understanding to include these different perspectives.
You nailed it. It's about recognizing that truth is complex.
Yeah.
And that our own views, while they're valid, are always just a piece of the puzzle.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a really mind-blowing deep dive.
It has.
We've gone from the social origins of thought all the way to the construction of reality.
Yeah.
Exploring these semantic spaces and how they impact everything.
Absolutely.
From politics to cross-cultural understanding.
It affects everything.
And Viktor Petrenko's work really encourages us to question our assumptions, to be curious about other points of view, and to engage in this process of creating meaning both individually and together.
Exactly. And that journey doesn't end here.
So if our language and culture shape our realities so much, can we ever truly understand someone from a completely different background?
That's a great question.
And if so, how can we navigate a world with so many different realities while still finding common ground?
Keep asking those questions. Keep exploring and keep those mental maps flexible.
I like that. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating world of Viktor Petrenko.
It was my pleasure.
Until next time, keep those minds open and curious.